Well, people are angry. People are angry. And before you get angry with me, maybe you're someone who's like, I don't want to hear anything. I want to go to church this Sunday and I want to hear, let's sing blue skies and rainbows and talk about fun, joyful things. I think we'll talk about fun, joyful things, but we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of anger right now in our country, a lot of anger. And it's not just from protesters. It's also people who disagree and are angry with the protesters. There's a lot of anger. But before you get angry with me, I just want to let you know that I have at times in my heart struggled with anger this week, angry at people who have power over us, who abuse that power, angry that another Black life has been taken, and brazenly someone's filming while this man is dying, angry that another police officer has used his authority for evil, angry that some have used the death of George Floyd as a license to sin, angry at all of these circumstances being in the middle of this whole coronavirus quarantine. To paraphrase my son Juan just a little bit, he said, I am angry that 2020 is trying to kill us all. I don't know what's going on. Thank God we don't have any murder hornets in Syracuse right now. We need to deal with our anger. But before we can deal with our anger, we have to acknowledge our anger. I imagine that all of us on this Zoom call have been angry at some point at something this week. Maybe you've even been angry today. Maybe you're angry that we're going to talk about anger. But we need to acknowledge it. Some of us, whether it's because of our background or something we've been taught and we've indoctrinated ourselves with in church or whatever religion, some of us, because of our personal temperament, believe that anger is always wrong. And we may have learned to over-apply that principle, that anger is always wrong. Maybe we like this scripture, Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Man, can't you just be gentle? Don't use any harsh words because you're going to make people angry. We should not be angry. Maybe that's the way you were taught or you feel, or that's just who you are. Anger is bad all the time in every circumstance. But the Bible actually teaches that Christians are supposed to be angry at evil and injustice, but they're not to sin. You know, Jesus was perfect in every way, and he never sinned. But in Mark chapter 11, Jesus turned over tables and he drove out merchants from the temple. Jesus was angry and he physically expressed his anger. There's a place for disciples, followers of Jesus, people who want their lives to be like Jesus's lives. There's a place for them to show and to have righteous indignation. God actually gave us the emotion of anger to motivate us to do something about sin and injustice. If you are a Christian, if you're a disciple of Jesus and you never get expressive about anything, exploitation of children, abuse of children, government corruption that hurts people, or racism, you probably don't have a spiritual pulse. You are not really thinking the way that God thinks about sin and about evil. God himself gets angry. One time when Israel had just went too far into sin, in Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 25, Isaiah prophesied this from God in Isaiah 5:25. Therefore, the Lord's anger burns against his people. His hand is raised and he strikes them down. God is angry about unrighteousness. Christians have a place for anger. Anger under control is a very powerful motivator. But as a follower of Jesus, our anger has a boundary. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26 says this, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Sinful anger can be incredibly damaging. In a survey in 2018 by Gallup, they found that 22%, almost a quarter of Americans often felt angry. This was only a couple years ago. This is before 2020, right? They found that the younger people were, between the ages of 15 and 29, they were twice as angry as older people, 50 and above. Agitated, angry. Anger-related violence is the reason stated for almost a quarter of all divorces in middle-class marriages. Physically, anger helps to produce ulcers and high blood pressure and possible strokes. And even it's related to depression. These things are associated with anger. Spiritually, anger causes us to lose our joy in Christ. We destroy relationships with groups of people, and most often the people who are closest to us. And when you're prone to anger, you can ruin your credibility as a follower of Jesus because of explosive fits of rage. James says that a man who can control his tongue really is a perfect man, but he also says the tongue cannot be tamed. So no one is perfect, right? How many of us have ever said things in anger in order to hurt or intimidate others? One of the greatest consequences of anger is that it can put down and put through deep roots of bitterness and resentment so deep that we can be soured by it and others can be soured by it and twisted for years to come. Bitter roots. If you struggle with anger, Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 33 says this, for as churning the milk produces butter, and as twisting the nose produces blood, so stirring up anger produces strife. If you're someone who is angry and who just sits in your anger, there is a result of that, and the result is strife in your own life, in the life of people around us. Sin can ruin us. Sin of anger can ruin us as disciples and as a church. Sometimes, though, anger just makes you look like a fool. Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 11 says, a fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control. I don't know about you, but I never feel as foolish as I do when I just let it all hang out in my anger. I feel stupid. There was a guy who used to be on the radio named Paul Harvey, and he told a story about a golfer who was having a really hard day on the golf course, and he was really frustrated by the time he got to the 13th hole. And so the guy took 3 consecutive shots from the tee, and all 3 of them from the golf tee, all 3 of those shots went into a pond nearby. He got so upset, so exasperated that he picked up his golf bag, he turned around like a discus thrower, and he threw the bag out into the pond. And then he stormed off the course. People thought, man, that guy just rage quit. If you're a video game player, that's called rage quitting right there. But a few minutes later, the guy came back and he waded out into the pond, and people said, well, the guy's come to his senses. But they all smiled. They saw that he was kind of embarrassed there at what he had done. As he fished out the dripping golf bag there, he unzipped the pocket on the side of the bag, took out his car keys, and then threw the bag back into the pond. No. And then he walked away so he could drive home. That's how stupid we look when we get angry that way. Maybe it's a reason for some of us not to take up golf. But someone once said that the size of a man can be measured by the size of the things that make him angry. We can get angry over silly, mundane problems in our lives. Too often, I believe, we get angry at the mundane and not as angry as we should about the important things. The Bible always teaches how to live as children of light. But if we're going to deal with anger, we have to first acknowledge our anger and then figure out how God says we should deal with that emotion. Yeah. Thomas Jefferson wrote about how to handle anger in his Rules of Living. He said, when angry, count to 10 before you speak. If very angry, count to 100. That's pretty good advice right there. That sounds like be quick to listen and slow to speak. Maybe some people aren't talking because they're counting to 10 or they're counting to 100. I'm not sure. Instead of being angry at little nuisances, Christians are supposed to be known for their kindness and their love. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 12, God says, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So what are we supposed to do? What is the balance we're looking for between wearing those kindness clothes and throwing over tables and pushing people out of the temple? Apparently, both of those are supposed to be like Jesus. We need to get angry about the right things, but we're supposed to be clothed in kindness. Romans chapter 11 and verse 22 says, consider therefore the kindness and sternness of God. Sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. God is kind, but he is able to be stern when it's required against sin. So overall, we're supposed to be kind, but there needs to be a level of sternness, of anger about sin and unrighteousness. Here's some things from the Bible I think we need to keep in mind so that anger, and it's okay to be angry, but so that anger doesn't control us or hurt us and the love and those we love and others in an unintended way, so that kindness can be the most prominent part of our lives. Number one, understand rage is sin. We must understand that rage is sin. One author called anger the devil's furnace. But the Bible strictly prohibits rage. Ephesians 4:31, get rid of bitterness and rage. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger. Not just a little bit. Get rid of all of it, along with every form of malice. Rage is sin. We have to get rid of rage. I don't know about you, but I've known people who pride themselves on the thought of, I tell it like it is. As if that's that's one of the qualities that you're supposed to have to be a real human being. You tell it like it is. But what they usually mean by that is, I'm as rude and don't care about others. I'll say whatever I want, whenever I want. I will give full vent to my anger. And we know what that looks like. You have to be honest enough with yourself, an evaluation of yourself, that you don't turn into a threatening person who just goes right at it and is always at the edge of eruption. Some of us struggle at that point. Some of us are at that point right now. We're angry about serious, important things, but you got to gauge the level of your anger. We don't realize it, but other people can tell just by your posture, your demeanor, that you're angry. You know, maybe this is a good thing that some of us are on quarantine. We don't look angry to some people, but we are very angry. And so we get time to evaluate our hearts and our anger in light of Jesus's kindness to us. But in person, people can tell when you're angry. If you are someone who has young kids or is going to have young kids, let me encourage you to watch VeggieTales with your kids. That's one of the best shows for Christians ever. Even the adults will love VeggieTales. It's awesome. But there's one episode of VeggieTales all about angry eyebrows. And if you've never seen the episode about angry eyebrows, it certainly tells you that people can tell when you're angry just by the look on your face. You don't have to yell. You can be counting to 10 and people know you're angry by your posture, much less counting to 100. Being angry right now about injustice and violence and racism, yes, absolutely. But we must get rid of rage. We must get rid of rage. If you want to join a protest, Absolutely, you should do that. Be wise, be careful. You want to speak up? Yes, absolutely, you can do that. You have to be less, still have to be wise there, but you have to be less careful to speak up. There's protests in Syracuse right now. Protesters have been kind of infiltrated with rioters and people who are bad actors. You got to be careful if you're thinking about joining those protests. That is your faith decision there if you want to speak out in that way. It's okay to be angry, but we can't give in to rage. If you're online, let me encourage you, be angry at the things that you should be angry about. But let me also encourage you, there's no need to justify riots. If you are someone who feels strongly that people should be protesting and something drastic has to be done, you cannot justify as a Christian rage. You can point out some actual fallacies, because often the people who are really the angriest about the protests and the riots will often have this thought when it comes to what happened, like a situation with George Floyd. Hey, one bad apple doesn't ruin the bunch. And so they'll say about the police officer, one bad apple doesn't, just because one person did it, that doesn't mean all of the police are bad. That's absolutely true. When you look at the protests that are going on and the riots, there are some people who are bad actors there, but those bad apples don't ruin the batch. There's a lot of people who are hurt, who are upset, who want to be heard, but they're not looters and they're not rioters. Right. Those bad apples don't ruin the whole batch. In the same way that one police officer who does something wrong doesn't ruin the reputation of all of the police officers. We got to be careful. I've seen people that I love and respect somewhat slightly justify riots in this way with a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. And the part they quote is that riot is the language of the unheard. That is absolutely true. But you have to be careful that you don't confuse an observation for a prescription. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't prescribing rioting. He was saying, this is what happens when people feel like they can't be heard. They break out and they riot. I don't think he would appreciate justifying rioting by his observation. If so, he would have encouraged rioting instead of peaceful protest during his lifetime. Rage is a sin. In your anger, do not sin. Number 2, godly anger confronts sin. There's a difference there. Rage is a sin, but godly anger confronts sin. Hosea chapter 8 and verse 5, if you haven't looked into the book of Hosea, the minor prophets are amazing. There's 10 books of minor prophets. Hosea is one of them. Hosea chapter 8 verse 5 says, throw out your calf idol, O Samaria. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of purity? Man, God is upset here. And you can find many examples of God being angry and confronting sin. You don't have to look much further than Genesis chapter 6. God gets angry. God gets angry. Ultimately, he displayed his anger through allowing his son to take our punishment, to take his anger at the cross. Christians are not supposed to be spineless. We're not supposed to have our heads in the sand to injustice and to evil. We have a calling to be salt and light, but there's times we need to confront the culture in front of us and sometimes the church within us. If you've never been angry about the culture around you as a Christian, you should be. Maybe we should be angry righteously more often than we actually are. We can't live with our heads in the sand. If you read the Bible, there is a biblical example for confronting culture, and his name is Jesus. Jesus confronted everything that his culture believed was right about God. He really, really rocked the boat. And what happened to him? He was crucified. He wasn't just crucified to save us from our sin. He was crucified because we are sinful and we don't want to know everything that God says, because we'll get angry at God instead of angry at the right things. We need to be careful. On social media, let me encourage us as followers of Jesus. Someone posts something or says something you don't agree with, if you can't figure out how to respond in a wise, loving, truthful way, maybe say, hey, can I message you? Can we talk offline? I'd love to talk a little bit more about this. Watch your speech. But there is grace and truth. At the same time you're watching your speech and being gracious and loving, you still have a requirement to tell the truth. And that's okay. I've seen some sisters online doing a great job with this. It is absolutely possible to be angry and to speak the truth in love. We need to be angry sometimes, and probably more often than we think we need to. Number 3, anger cannot be a stepping stone. Anger cannot be a stepping stone. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 says this: in your anger, do not sin. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Your anger, instead of being something that's righteous and right and that can be used for good and the glory of God, can also be used in your life and in the lives of others as a foothold for Satan, as a stepping stone for Satan. There's plenty to be angry about, but anger can result in resentment, and resentment builds to bitterness, which can have long-term effects on relationships and even on people's health. That's why the Bible so often counsels forgiveness for Christians, because it helps us to wash away those destructive feelings. Hey, you can forgive somebody and still be triggered by what somebody did you, and even after you forgive them in the past. Yeah. Sometimes instead of going back to what happened to you in the past, you have to go back to the forgiveness that you said you were going to give them in the past. And remember how the forgiveness felt, not how the feeling felt. Don't let anger be a stepping stone, be a foothold for Satan. The Bible talks about the great glory of forgiveness and of love. If you're angry about something for a long time, you need to either get help working through it with prayer, sharing to a brother or a sister. Don't let Satan use your anger as a foothold. I got a text about anger and rage the other day from someone, and they weren't saying, hey, aren't you angry and raging with me? They said, will you please pray for me? Because I know this is not right. Hey, we get angry. Even in situations that have nothing to do with coronavirus or the injustice of racism or police brutality, we can get that. Hey, the road rage is there for a reason, right? People have road rage. That's not right. But now things are a little bit more prominent. Things can be magnified. Our anger can be magnified. Don't let it get the best of you. Don't let Satan get a foothold in your life or in any of your relationships. Number 4, you be a Christian. You be a Christian. Romans chapter 12 and verse 17 says this: do not repay anyone evil for evil. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it's written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. You be a Christian. If you are looking at someone else's opinions or thoughts or the news or social media or one of your relatives or just one of your Facebook or Instagram friends, and you're getting angry and you're so angry about what they're saying, do you want them to behave like Christians, or do you want to behave like a Christian? You be a Christian is the message of the Bible. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make other people right when they say or do these things, but it's your responsibility to follow Jesus, because you said, I want to follow Jesus. And if you're like me, when I counted the cost and someone said, JC, well, if Shyla decides she doesn't want to be a Christian and no one else in the church wants to be a Christian, are you going to be a Christian? And I said, yes, I want to follow Jesus. We need to be careful at the point where we expect everyone else to follow Jesus, but we don't want to. You be a Christian. Acknowledge your anger, but don't ever forget you made the decision to be a Christian. You can act rightly before others. Mm-hmm. When we feel unfairly treated, we look for ways to recover our loss. And some of that can be in anger or sarcasm or just off the cuff remarks or Be careful even reposting things from other people unless you've read it. Because you agree with the premise, there's things that can be much more explosive in other people's writings than may be in your post. Just be thoughtful there. You be a Christian. Right now, some people want things to be eye for eye and tooth for tooth. There's no Old Testament Christians. I'm sorry. God said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in the Old Testament. Jesus said, love your enemy. Jesus said, love your enemy. I've seen too many people even putting things back and forth about how we need to protect all of our things with guns. And I saw, unfortunately, a guy was protecting his store with a sword. People are into that. Hey, I'm from Georgia. People got guns. You should be very slow to get to there, because Jesus taught, if your enemy slaps you on the right cheek, then turn to him also your left. If someone steals your cloak, the Bible doesn't say run him down so you can take your cloak back. We have to be followers of Jesus. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, it's easier to be enthusiastic about humanity with a capital H, so all of humanity, than it is to love individual women and men, especially those who are uninteresting, exasperating, depraved, or otherwise unattractive. Loving everybody in general can be an excuse for loving nobody in particular. We have to be careful with who we are. You be a Christian. You have so little control of who everyone else is going to be. You be a Christian and everything that goes with that. Even among brothers and sisters, even in your hurt and even in your pain, go to Jesus. If you're hurting and you're in pain, you be a Christian. I was able to hear from a very wise brother Wednesday night who said this, and I found it in my life to be true. He probably has found it in his life to be true more often than I have. He said, I never expect justice in this life. Jesus didn't get justice. That is, in the context of what we were talking about with discrimination and racism, I felt disgusted that he never expects to get justice. He's happily surprised when he does. That is incredibly sad. But we follow a man who never got justice.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It was sad, but I would say convictingly true. Convictingly true. Lastly, let God reign.
Yeah.
Let God reign. Romans chapter 12 goes on to say in verse 19, do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. Verse 20, on the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. Do not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That should sound familiar. Martin Luther King kind of paraphrased that in his famous quote, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Let God reign. How does God reign? Love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Be like God. Is love. I wish there was a part in 1 Corinthians 13 where it said, love is patient, love is kind, love is easy. Don't you wish that was included there? Love is easy. No, it's not easy. It took the cross of Christ to bring us into the light and take us out of darkness. Love is patient and love is kind, but it's not easy. The cross of Christ is our crown of glory. Brothers and sisters, we know how to love. Love is the reign of God in our lives. Not anger and not rage. Our prayer needs to be that every day we relearn how to love. that we love the oppressed, that we love the victims, that we love the voiceless, but also that we continue to love our enemies. We need to acknowledge our anger, asking God how to love through the bitterness, through the hurt, and through the confusion. Let God reign. I'm going to close out here with Psalm 136. In Psalm 136, the phrase, his love endures forever, is repeated 26 times, which is pretty amazing because there's only 26 verses in Psalm 136. His love endures forever. Amen. Now, it's in there not because David is not original, but he wanted to emphasize God's goodness and loving kindness towards us through his deeds. David starts by saying that God is the God of gods. He's the Lord of lords. He does great wonders and made the heavens. He governs the sun and stars. He led Israel through the Red Sea, the promised land. He struck down evil kings. And then he says, as he ends the psalm, to the one who remembered us in our low state, his love endures forever, and freed us from our enemies. His love endures forever. And who gives food to every creature. His love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of heaven. His love endures forever. God made a choice to love us, to be kind, and we can make a choice to love and be kind as well. We are connected to one another, and we must get rid of anger that leads to sin. And somehow, I don't know how. Only God knows that. And he showed us through Jesus. Somehow, replace it with love. Brothers and sisters, we're going to break out now into our breakout rooms. I want to encourage you to have a great time of fellowship and be in prayer now, not only for our country, not only for our state, but for our area, for Syracuse, for those around us. Please pray.